so I pinched her. A man and his little girl were riding on an elevator. It stopped and a beautiful woman got on. The elevator started again. All of a sudden, the woman turned around and slapped the man. He was shocked. As soon as she got off, his little girl asked him, "That woman didn't like you, did she, Daddy?" He muttered, "No, she didn't. She certainly slapped me hard." His little daughter said, "Well, I didn't like her either. She stepped on my toe, so I pinched her." Sometimes life slaps us and we wonder what we did to deserve it. It may be our fault, but often we discover that we were merely in the wrong place at the wrong time. Life isn't always easy and people can be difficult, but if we try to understand why people do what they do and say what they say, it helps. Understanding your boss, your employee, your fellow worker, your spouse, your friend, your teenager is well worth the investment. Something to die for. In 1943, the death rate among some Allied bomber pilots and their crews was nearly 60%. In some squadrons, the mortality rate approached 90%. The Nazis targeted specific squadrons, attempting to lower morale among the other squadrons. One group had been targeted, and of the original 36 planes and crews, only 3 survived after 3 weeks. Yet every day, when asked, these 3 crews took off to near certain death without complaint. Some survivors of the war recently had their 50th reunion. They all said that they did not regret the sacrifices they had made for their country. They knew their cause was just, and they were willing to die for it. These men had a cause they believed in so much that they were willing to risk their lives for it. Do you have such a cause? A response to love. Cyrus, king of ancient Persia, once gave audience to a young prince he had captured. The prince and his family came to Cyrus's tent to discuss the terms of surrender. Cyrus, who was extremely handsome, asked the prince, "What will you give me if I set you free?" The prince said, "Half of all I own." Cyrus said, "What would you give me if I set your children free?" The prince said, "I'd give you all that I own." Finally, Cyrus looked at the prince's wife and said, "What would you give me if I set your wife free?" The prince said, "I'd give my life." Cyrus was so impressed by the prince's response that he released the prince and all his family without any requirements. Later, that same prince asked his wife, "Didn't you think Cyrus was extremely handsome?" She replied, "I did not notice. I only had eyes for the one who said he'd give his life for me." No wonder. People respond to being loved in marvelous ways. The spelling bee. We all remember the school spelling bee. The teacher would announce, "Whoever wins this contest will get to go to Washington, D.C. for the National Spelling Bee Championship. You'll represent the state of Oklahoma." We'd all line up against the blackboard and try to spell the words. The good news was, if you spelled the word correctly, you remained standing. The bad news was, the longer you stayed, the harder the words. It was a zero-based procedure. One mistake, and you sat down. And when you sat down, no trip to Washington, D.C. for you. Your dreams were crushed. If life is like a spelling bee, we're all out of luck. None of us spell life correctly. That's why we believe in grace. Grace is less interested in our past than in what we're going to do. Grace is bigger and deeper than our mistakes. Grace forgives, and that power is greater than our tendency to misspell. Nancy Madden's story. A church in Seward, Alaska burned down. It was a small church without many members and with little resources. But to their great surprise, people from all over the United States went to Seward to help them rebuild. After it was rebuilt, a member said, "I'm amazed at how much we've grown this year. We've really developed a confidence and respect for one another. It was there before. It's just grown stronger and more open. We've grown closer to God, to each other, and to our community. That awful fire becomes more of a blessing each and every day." We don't know why so many bad things happen, but when they do, we must experience them and we must respond. Life may be less about what actually happens to us and more about our attitude in handling it. Good things can emerge through tragedy. How we choose to respond makes all the difference in the world. The bottom is solid. A professor in a school training ministers received the tragic news that his only son had been killed in a car accident. The professor left the classroom, got into his car, and drove to the city where his son had lived. 4 weeks went by, and no one on campus had heard from him. You can imagine how concerned everyone was. They feared he had completely fallen apart. Then one morning, when the student body was in the chapel, he slipped into the back door and participated in the service. When the service was over, he went to the front and said, "I'm here to tell you that I've been to the bottom, the very bottom." Again he was quiet and his head was lowered. Then he looked up and he said, "But I'm also here to tell you that the bottom is solid, very, very solid." No matter how deeply you might go into the darkness, grace is always underneath you, and it's very, very solid. How to recruit. 3 military recruiters accepted an invitation to speak to the senior class of a local high school. It was agreed that each recruiter would take 15 minutes to make his pitch. The Army recruiter went first, but he spoke for more than 25 minutes. The Navy recruiter also spoke for 25 minutes. The Marine Corps recruiter, realizing that his 15-minute speech had now been cut to about 2 minutes, walked to the podium and spent the first 60 seconds in complete silence. He finally said, "I doubt whether there are 2 or 3 people in this room who could make it as Marines, but I'd like to see those 2 or 3 of you as soon as this assembly is dismissed." He turned and left. When he arrived in the cafeteria, he was mobbed by a herd of high school students. We love challenges. We want to do something significant with our lives. Let's listen for the challenges that are calling us. A brand new Ford. Years ago in a small Oklahoma town, a wealthy oilman grew weary of the local high school football team being defeated by their rivals from a nearby community. So in what surely was one of the most dramatic speeches ever given to a football team, this man told the kids, "If you beat our rivals Friday night, I'll buy every boy and coach on this team a brand new Ford." Well, the kids went crazy. They howled, cheered, and slapped each other on the back. For the next week, they ate, drank, and breathed football. When the time came to play the game, the team was ecstatic, and they were promptly demolished 38-0. Their exuberance didn't translate into a single point. A week of whoop-de-doo couldn't compensate for their year-long lack of discipline. Emotion has a definite place in our lives, but it's unreliable when forced to stand alone. Sudden death playoff. At the end of a tournament, 2 golfers were tied, so they entered into a sudden death playoff. In the overtime, one man hit a long drive down the middle of the fairway. The second man hit his drive high and short, and believe it or not, his ball rolled into a paper bag. He asked the official if he could remove his ball from the bag without having to take a penalty stroke. The official ruled that if the ball moved while the bag was removed, he would have to add a stroke. After pondering the situation for a couple of minutes, the player asked his caddy for a match. He set the bag on fire and accomplished his goal. He removed the paper bag without moving the ball. He proceeded to play without the 1-stroke penalty, and he eventually won the tournament. Problems or opportunities? Our response determines the outcome. How will we approach today? Grandmothers. A 3rd-grade student wrote, "A grandmother is a lady who has no children of her own. She likes other people's little girls and boys. A grandfather is a man grandmother. Grandmothers don't have to do anything except to be there. They are so old they shouldn't play hard or run. It's enough if they drive us to the market where the pretend horse is and have a lot of quarters ready. They should never say, 'Hurry up.' Usually grandmothers are fat, but not too fat to tie your shoes. They wear glasses and funny underwear. They can take their teeth and gums out. Grandmothers don't have to be smart, just answer questions like, 'Why isn't God married?' And how come dogs chase cats? When they read to us, they don't skip or mind if it's the same story again. Everybody should try to have a grandmother because they are the only grown-ups who have time. Way to go, Mr. Moore. After a job transfer to a new city, a man joined the company's softball team. During one game, this employee kept hearing a loud voice yelling, "Way to go, Mr. Moore," and "You can do it, Mr. Moore." He was amazed that someone in this new city would know his name. After the game, he asked his wife and son if they knew who was yelling encouragement to him. His son spoke up, "Dad, it was me." The father was astonished. "I'm your father. Why did you call me Mr. Moore?" And the young man replied, "I didn't want anyone to know that we were related." Sometimes we embarrass others with our performances in life, but it also helps to know that there are people who will cheer for us regardless of our achievements. One of our biggest goals in life is to fill the stands with people who will cheer us on. A second goal should be for us to encourage others in their efforts too. How did I escape? For several months, a little boy had been watching his mother's stomach increase in size. It was becoming harder and harder to sit on her lap. "Mommy, why is your stomach getting so big?" He was told that his little sister was inside her stomach. "Mommy, why is my little sister inside your stomach?" He was told that he used to be in her stomach too. When the boy's father got home, the boy asked his father if he could talk to him in private. "Daddy, I need answers to 2 questions. First, why does Mommy keep eating little kids? And second, how did I escape?" Like children, sometimes we reach faulty conclusions too. Sometimes we have just enough information to be dangerous. Many problems could be solved if we were a little more careful in the way we reach our conclusions. Burning the ships. In the year 1519, the Spanish explorer Cortés landed in Veracruz, Mexico. When his soldiers unloaded their ships, Cortés gave an interesting command. He told them to burn the ships. His troops followed his orders. There were many things Cortés did not know about Mexico or about what would happen to them in a new land. But he knew that if they faced danger and their ships were beckoning in the harbor, his soldiers might retreat and sail for the comfort of home. By burning the ships, he eliminated one option. They no longer had an escape route. No ships meant no mutiny. He gave his men a great gift, motivation for them to succeed. A commitment is a choice to stick it out, regardless of the circumstances. Constantly looking back over one's shoulder is not a good way to live. Is there a ship you need to burn today? Why not you? A minister was walking down the hallway of his church one Sunday morning. He carried his Bible in one hand and his robe was draped over his other arm. As he glanced into the preschool room, he saw a 4-year-old. This little guy was all alone in a very big room. He said to the minister, "Hi, my name's Tommy, and I'm all alone in this big room." The minister tried to reassure the boy. He said, "Don't worry. I'm sure that before long somebody will be with you." Little Tommy looked up at him and with such childlike innocence and sincerity pleaded, "Why not you?" Too often we neglect, ignore, avoid, or refuse to act upon that question, "Why not you?" Being the most knowledgeable, talented, or eloquent may not be as important as being the most available and caring. Why not you? Hubert Humphrey. Once in Minnesota, Hubert Humphrey and a friend, Judge Miles Lord, were shopping. The judge saw that a tour bus from California was outside the store. He decided to pull a prank on Hubert. He told the folks on the bus that he was the town's mayor. He also warned them about a man in the town who thought he was Hubert Humphrey. "He looks and even sounds like him. Don't give him any money, but please be kind to him because he doesn't mean anybody any harm." The judge, having set the trap, went back into the store and said, "Hubert, there's a busload of tourists outside dying to meet you." Hubert rushed outside and shook hands with all of the tourists. He came back inside and said, "I don't understand those California people. Every time I shook hands with one of them, somebody would giggle. Life and even our friends can sometimes confuse our identity. Knowing who we are is invaluable to life. New beginnings. A woman had married the man of her dreams, and they were very happy. But her father, whom she deeply loved, suddenly died. A few months later, she was injured in a car crash and was comatose for weeks. She recovered and started her life again. But then her husband told her he was divorcing her for someone else. She struggled through her pain, picked up the pieces, and began again. She met another man, fell in love, and was married. 4 months after their wedding, he was killed in an auto accident. This was just too much. She decided to take her own life. Before she did, she thought she would attend one last church service. During communion, she experienced warmth and peace in an overwhelming way. That day, she found the beginning of a new life. New beginnings can be found for us when we're most desperate and when we turn to God's love. The line test. 10 teenagers were placed in a room to study response to peer pressure. They were told to raise their hands when the teacher pointed to the longest line on separate charts. But 9 of the 10 had been told ahead of time to vote for the second longest line, leaving only one teen who was uninformed. When the 10 were together, the instructor gave the directions. 9 of the 10 immediately raised their hands for the second longest line. Time after time, the one teen saw the other 9 vote for the shorter line rather than the longest line. About 75% of the time, the uninformed teen would raise their hand and vote with the others simply because they lacked the courage to be different. Maturity is realizing that accuracy and convictions are more important than popularity. Erosion. The Colorado River winds through the Arizona desert. It goes through sandstone, limestone, shale, and granite, biting chunks out of the banks. Tirelessly, the river wears away the rock grain by grain, pebble by pebble, day by day, year after year. The result? The Grand Canyon. This magnificent sight is really nothing more than an incredible monument to the destructive power of erosion. Few things in life suddenly collapse. Rather, demise is usually a process. It's a grain at a time, pebble by pebble, day by day. We make small decisions every day which eventually determine what type of person we become. So often it's not the big things in life that shape us. The big decisions in life only reveal the cracks or the strengths that already exist. Let's make sure we don't make compromises that will eventually erode our character, even when no one is watching. A 10-run lead. If a relief pitcher in baseball enters the game in the 9th inning with his team ahead by 10 runs, it's much easier than coming into the game with a 1-run lead. When you're ahead by only 1 run, there's absolutely no margin for error. If someone hits a home run, then the best you can do is go into extra innings. But if you enter with a 10-run lead, you could even serve up 2 grand slams and still win the game by 2 runs. The difference in the two perspectives is enormous. One is racked with tension, insecurity, and a very real possibility of failure. The other is marked with confidence in knowing the ultimate outcome will be a victory. When we build a spiritual program into our lives, it's like having a 10-run lead. We still have a responsibility to perform and to finish strong, but our victory is guaranteed. That knowledge gives us confidence and helps us live better every day. Focus on service. A former chairman of the board of General Mills often gave his salespeople this advice: forget about the sales you hope to make and concentrate on the service you want to render. What a great perspective. When our concentration is upon ourselves and our needs, we become our own customer. But when we think about our service to others and how to meet their needs, we become more dynamic, capable, and helpful. Customers also find it harder to resist someone who's trying to help them solve a problem. Ironically, By putting others first, both the customer and the salesperson win. That approach transforms more than our sales. Think of the difference that approach could make in a marriage, as a parent, or with a friend. Forget about the sales you hope to make and concentrate on the service you want to render. Great intentions. The new employee stood before the paper shredder looking confused. A passing secretary came to his rescue. She cheerfully asked, "Need some help?" "Yes," the man replied. "How does this thing work?" "It's very simple," she said. She took the huge report from his hand and fed it into the shredder. He looked totally puzzled, but regained his composure enough to blurt out, "Thanks, but where do the copies come out?" Sometimes people mean well, they really have great intentions, but it's more than just the thought that counts. Being helpful and courteous is important in life, but it's also important to be accurate, factual, and attentive to detail. When you're helpful, make sure it's needed. When you're considerate, make sure you know what you're doing. And once you're armed with the facts, don't just sit there, do it. The beggar and the dollar. A beggar always received $1 from a priest, but one day the priest asked the beggar for $1. No one had ever asked him for anything. Shocked, he gave $1 to the priest, who thanked him and told him he had put the dollar in the offering plate. This ritual lasted several weeks until one day the priest said, "Bring your dollar to church on Sunday and place it in the offering yourself." The beggar protested. He had never been before, he didn't have the right clothes on, or the people wouldn't like him. But he came on Sunday, dropped his dollar in the plate, and left. This became the ritual, until one day he stayed for the entire service. One thing led to another, and his life changed. Now he's a leader in that church. Whether a beggar or a priest, we don't do anyone a favor when we assume they have nothing to give. We grow immensely when we start giving back to others. The Hatchet Man. Charles Colson was the hatchet man in the Nixon White House. He was found guilty in the Watergate scandal and went to prison. In an interview, he said, "I had accomplished everything I dreamed about as a kid. I was 41 years old, had a healthy 6-figure income, clients waiting at the door, a yacht, a limousine, and a driver, and I was a friend of the president. And I never felt more rotten. I didn't have a solid foundation under my life. I was all show and no go." Unfortunately, he's not the only one who built an impressive facade around his life. But what happened to Charles Colson can also happen to us. Our lives can change too. We don't have to live in empty and meaningless ways. Charles Colson discovered that amazing grace could fill that void in his life. He's now a different person. We have that opportunity as well. Drives at night. Did you hear about the elderly man who decided to get married? One of his friends asked him, "Why? Can she cook?" The elderly man said, "Cook? Heavens no. She hasn't cooked in years." "Well, is she real pretty? Is that why you married her?" "No, she's quite plain and ordinary." "Well, is she real romantic and affectionate?" "No, not at all. She just sits in her rocking chair and I sit in mine and we while away the time." The friend said, "Well, I'm confused. Exactly why did you marry her?" The older man leaned over and said, "Because she can drive at night." We all need some practical help from time to time, don't we? And of course, we all know others who need help too. The good news is we don't have to be married to help someone, nor do we have to wait to grow older before this process begins. There's someone close to us right now who could use our help today. Solitaire. An 87-year-old man claimed he had played over 1 million games of solitaire. He started playing as a boy working on the farm. He passed the nights competing with himself at the card table. Later, as a traveling salesman, the habit helped pass the night in motels. If he played 24 hours a day, it would take him 19 years to reach 1 million games. If he played 40 hours a week, it would take him 82 years to reach 1 million games. He spent virtually an entire lifetime playing solitaire. Playing solitaire doesn't hurt anyone, but it doesn't help anyone either. Think of all the opportunities to help others this man missed. He could have visited a nursing home, taught children how to read, or worked in a church. Playing a million games of solitaire sounds like a wasted life to me. When we wrap our lives up solely in ourselves, it makes for a pretty small package. Pedestrians. I've discovered that when I'm driving a car, many pedestrians seem to be imbeciles and half-wits. They'll walk off the pavement right in front of me without even looking to see if a car is coming. It's as if they want me to hit them. But when I'm a pedestrian, I can't believe how inconsiderate motorists behave. They honk their way along the street as if the road belonged to them. It seems they don't care if they run over me or not. What's the difference? 2 words: my perspective. I see life through my self-centered lens. When I am the pedestrian, motorists are idiots. When I am the motorist, pedestrians are fools. Others have different views from mine because they look at life from their own perspectives. If 6 billion people are going to get along on planet Earth, we must learn to be considerate of other people. Patience, humility, and a wider perspective are essential to a good life. The publisher. A magazine publisher said, "I wish someone had told me 25 years ago that while work is important, the most important things involve family and friends. Many times I chose business-related activities and trips that mean so little now when compared to soccer games, dinners with friends, and school night open houses that cannot be recaptured. After 19 years, I lost my job for no reason except the desire to cut a budget. So make time for your family and friends, take time to exercise, laugh more, and talk to people outside your company. We only get one chance to live. A person has to work to pay the bills, but I believe the ultimate meaning in life can't be lost when we retire or lose our job. The ultimate meaning of life is revealed when we discover our faith, invest in our families, and find the ability to be a good friend." Health fads. Health fads periodically sweep our country. Sylvester Graham, C.W. Post, and J.H. Kellogg all responded to such fads. Graham's crackers were a natural food answer to fears about the bad effects of factory work for the urban masses. White-collar workers, fearful that they might be feminized by the shift from manual to non-manual labor, were reassured that their masculinity could be preserved by eating natural foods. Grape nuts were originally sold as brain food for middle-class people. J.H. Kellogg's breakfast products were good for you, especially cornflakes, because they reduced your sex drive. Eat enough cornflakes, they claimed, and you would be freed from sin. To be sure, an argument can be made that we are what we eat. We need to watch our diets, but life is probably less about what we eat and more about the choices we make and the attitudes we hold. Credit cards. One of our greatest enemies can be a simple little piece of plastic, a credit card. These cards can be dangerous. We can end up paying outrageous interest rates with these cards. The percentage of Americans who aren't paying their monthly balance has risen to an all-time high. Obviously, many people are living beyond their means. That sets in motion all kinds of negative repercussions involving many aspects of life. Financial stress can create family tension and marital conflict. Ironically, some people deal with their financial depression by going shopping. Often they pay for their purchases with a credit card, which only furthers the cycle. We buy things we don't need with money that we don't have from people we don't like. Credit cards can be helpful as long as we use them and they don't use us. We couldn't smell a thing. 2 teens were suspended from high school for eating so much garlic that no one could stand to be around them. They'd read that garlic cleanses the blood and lowers blood pressure. Each student consumed 3 or 4 heads of garlic. When others complained about their odor, the boys laughed and continued to eat more garlic. When confronted by school officials, one of the boys protested that his smell couldn't be all that bad. After all, he said, we were blowing in each other's faces and we couldn't smell a thing. That seems to be the approach some people take toward their own souls. They know the difference between right and wrong, but they laugh and flaunt their participation in the wrong. If they continue long enough in that pattern, they become unaware of how unattractive they are. If others are indignant with us, it may be for a good reason. Single adults. Some people make thoughtless comments like, "What you need is a good wife," or "What's a pretty girl like you doing unmarried?" Or the parental favorite can rear its ugly head, "When are you going to give me a grandchild?" It's conveyed that if you're unmarried, something is wrong with you that only marriage can cure. How ridiculous. Being a single adult can be great. Some of the greatest people our world has known have been single adults. Jesus' singleness didn't taint his competence or change his identity. His marital status did not determine his perspective on life, nor did it limit him in any way. Instead, his singleness provided him unique opportunities to live an abundant life and to make a difference in his world. Singles don't need to put their lives on hold until they're married, and married folks need to lend dignity to the status of our single friends. Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Colin Blunt wanted to benefit his community as he earned a scouting award. As his family drove past his school, they saw the janitor, Mr. Barnes, hanging holiday lights. Colin said that Mr. Barnes was retiring soon. The only planned celebration for him was a staff luncheon where a few words would be shared regarding his work during his nearly 40 years as a custodian at that school. So that Cub Scout took matters into his own hands. He wrote and passed out flyers to all the classes announcing, "Thank you, Mr. Barnes Day." He made over 900 buttons for everyone to wear. On his day, Mr. Barnes received a standing ovation. This quiet, behind-the-scenes janitor was moved to tears. It was a win-win situation for everyone. The students saw how much Mr. Barnes had done, and they thanked him. Mr. Barnes knew he was appreciated, and Colin learned that it is better to give than to receive. A Christmas pony. A man remembers wanting a pony one particular Christmas when he was a boy. He even prayed for a pony. He told his parents, "If you don't get me a pony for Christmas, give me nothing." So on Christmas morning, there was no pony, and he had no presents. It was his worst Christmas ever. Later on Christmas Day, he saw a man with a pony walking down the street. The man looked at his door and then passed by. That was the last straw. The boy was overcome with tears. Then the man, hearing the boy crying, said, "Hey, kid, do you know a boy named Lenny Steffens?" "Yes, sir, that's me." "Well, this is your pony. I've been looking all over for you." To this day, Lenny doesn't know if that was his best Christmas or his worst. At Christmas, things don't always work out according to our schedules. If we hold our lives together and keep disappointment away, maybe our gift is right around the corner too. Perfection versus recovery. No one plays a perfect round of golf. A golfer doesn't hit the ball just like they want to hit it on every shot. Even the best of the pros continually make mistakes. Like golf, life is not about perfection. No one leads a perfect life. Everyone makes mistakes, has difficulty, and faces adversity. Some of us make poor choices in vocation or in dating decisions. Some drink too much or experiment with drugs. At times we cause traffic accidents. All of us at some point or in some way find ourselves in the rough or the sand or in some other hazard of life. Our goal is recovery, not perfection. Sometimes the only club we have at our disposal is our attitude. Life will never be perfect, but we can always improve. Life may not be easy, but it can and must be enjoyable. After all, we just get to play one round in life. Our attitude makes all the difference. Let's examine the attitudes we'll carry in our bag today. North Africa. During World War II, an American GI serving in North Africa made friends with one of the local men. The American serviceman noticed that wherever this man went, he would walk out front, while his wife would walk behind him leading their camel. Some years later, the GI returned to North Africa and looked up his old friend. But he noticed this time the man's wife now walked out front while the husband trailed behind, leading the camel. The American presumed that women's lib had arrived in North Africa too. But his friend said, "Oh no, that's not it at all. It's just that there are still many unexploded landmines left after the war." Some people are like that man. They only think of saving themselves. But selfish attitudes never draw the best out of other people. Your challenge today is to think of others before yourself. In so doing, you will develop the capacity to love and to be loved. A $19.95 cruise. Have you heard the ridiculous story of the man who saw an ad for a $19.95 cruise? He went to the travel agency and said, "There must be an error in your ad. The cruise must really cost $1,995. The agent said, "No, the ad is correct. It costs $19.95. "Well, okay, sign me up," the man said. At that moment, someone came up behind him and hit him in the head with a baseball bat. When he came to, he was drifting down the river strapped to a log. Soon he slammed into another log that also had a man strapped on it. He said to the other fellow, "Is that all there is to this cruise? Don't they even serve a meal?" And the other fellow replied, "Well, they did last year." Some folks just don't seem to get it. They keep taking these $19.95 cruises. They refuse to learn. There's a better way to live. Let's not keep repeating yesterday's mistakes. If we're continually in pain, don't you think it's time to do something different? Parental love. 3 men and the 12-year-old son of one of the men had a wonderful day salmon fishing in Alaska. But as they were flying out of the bay, a leak in one of the pontoons filled it up with water. The extra weight made the plane crash into the freezing water. All 4 survived the crash, but the 12-year-old boy wasn't strong enough to swim to the shore, but was slowly being taken out to sea. The other 2 men were exhausted when they reached the shore, but they turned to watch their companion stay with his son in the frigid water. They saw that father who could have saved his own life make the choice to stay with his son. He cradled his son in his arms as they were both swept out to sea. The father chose to die with his son rather than allow his son to die alone. Most parents would not hesitate to make that same decision. It's too bad our kids may not know how much we really love them. Psychology students. Some college psychology students were studying about the impact on a person when they received encouragement as opposed to the response when positive feedback was withheld. One day their professor left the room for a few moments. Leaving psychology students alone even for a few minutes is risky business. They decided that in his lecture, every time he moved toward the radiator in the classroom, they would give him dramatic positive reinforcement. They'd nod, applaud, smile, and furiously take notes. But when he moved away from the radiator, they moaned and groaned, yawned, put their pencils down, looked out the window, and pretended to be bored and even asleep. By the end of the week, this college professor was giving his entire lecture sitting at the radiator. Never underestimate the power of encouragement. It shapes and influences us more powerfully than we realize. Only 10 words. An American pilot was shot down and captured during the Gulf War in 1991. Some captured pilots were beaten and humiliated in every possible way. But the Iraqis made a mistake when they put our pilots on their national television. Their tactics infuriated Americans. One pilot had been badly beaten and his face was swollen from the crash. Fearing for his life, he mumbled their propaganda into the camera. But then they let him speak to his family back home. He said only 10 words. "Honey, I love you. Tell the kids to study hard." In 4 words, he assured his wife that nothing could separate his love for her and that she was still his first priority. In 6 words, he told his kids they still had a father who wanted them to do their best. What would you say if you only had 10 words to say to those you love? There's tremendous power in being simple. Honey, I love you. Tell the kids to study hard. Anywhere from right here. Once a man was visiting with a woman who lived in a bayou down in southern Louisiana. She was complaining about her circumstances. Everyone lives such an exciting life. They live in exciting places, and they have exciting jobs, and they do exciting things. And here I am, stuck on this bayou. It's just not fair. The man listened to her, but finally said, "You have a boat, don't you?" "Yes." He continued, "Ma'am, this bayou empties into a creek, and that creek empties into a stream. That stream, ma'am, flows into the mighty Mississippi. That river flows into the Gulf of Mexico, which pours into the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean pours into all the other oceans of the world. Ma'am, you can go anywhere in the world from right here if you really want to. Maybe we should do less complaining and more exploring. It's a wonderful world if we really want it to be." Trust in the Lord. A man found life to be unbearable. He was caught between the pressures of a new career, overwork, and self-doubt. He felt alone as he was away from his friends and family. Fearing that he was at the end of his rope, he sought the counsel of a respected doctor. The doctor gave a surprising prescription. He said to the young man, "Repeat these words a dozen times a day, and especially at night just before you go to sleep. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." The young man followed the doctor's advice. He said, "My zest for life returned. I was able to accept things about myself and others I couldn't handle before. Within a year, my entire life had turned around." The young man quit thinking so much about his problems and started to draw strength from beyond himself. When he stopped worrying about his problems, he was set free to do his best. The Frank Sinatra Detention Club. A Chicago high school teacher found a novel way to deal with those who cause trouble. He created the Frank Sinatra Detention Club. For 30 minutes, detention students must sit still. No talking, no homework, no sleeping. They must listen to old Blue Eyes croon songs from a bygone era. The kids hate it. "They're miserable," reported the teacher, who is himself a big Sinatra fan. He devised the club as a way to make detention more fun for himself and less so for the kids. One senior said, "It got to where I couldn't stand it. It was so boring." But the teacher isn't totally heartless. He allows the students to sing along if they want, but nobody does. There are two major pains in life, the pain of discipline and the pain of regret. Our choices always have consequences. If we make the right choices in life, then maybe we won't have to listen to old Blue Eyes. Kiss twice a week. A man was concerned about his wife's lack of sparkle, energy, or zest in life. Finally, he took her to a doctor who really took an interest in her. This doctor listened to her talk. Suddenly, he got out of his chair and went over and kissed her on both cheeks. The results were amazing. She was transformed. The old sparkle was back in her eyes and color in her cheeks. She was radiant again. The doctor said, "Well, I think that ought to do it." But her husband said, "I don't understand. What do you mean?" The doctor said, "Well, it's really very simple. Your wife just needs to be kissed twice a week. That's all she needs." The man scratched his head and said, "I really don't understand it, Doc, but if that's what she needs, then I'll bring her in every Tuesday and Thursday. There are some things only we can do for others. Let's be sure to do them." Work out the details. Will Rogers, the humorist from Oklahoma, once listened to an admiral describe the menace of German U-boats during World War I. Eventually, Rogers raised his hand and asked, "Tell me, can those things operate in boiling water?" "No," the admiral replied. "I'm sure they cannot." "Well then," said Rogers, "you've got your solution. Just boil the ocean." The admiral gave him a blank stare and finally muttered, "How?" Rogers smiled. "I gave you the idea. You work out the details." We agree that certain character traits are universally agreed upon. We agree that it's important for all human beings to be honest, fair, dependable, responsible, kind, and faithful. Now that I've reminded you of these and other traits, I'll let you work out the details. A wise dog. A farmer taught his dog to carry a written order in his mouth to the butcher shop for sausages. Every day the dog came to the butcher shop with his master's order, and when he returned with the sausages, the farmer would reward him with a treat. The routine was so predictable that the butcher became careless about reading it. One month, when the bill was sent to the farmer, he disputed the huge number of sausages that had been charged to him. He told the butcher he never ordered that many sausages. The next time the dog came in with a slip of paper between his teeth, the butcher took the trouble to look at it. The paper was blank. They soon discovered that when the dog wanted a sausage, he found a piece of paper and trotted off to the butcher's with it. There are many dogs in our world that eat up our resources too. Don't be negligent, because they can quickly deceive and consume you. Cartographers. In ancient days, there were map makers or cartographers who used the instruments and knowledge available to make their maps of the then known world. They all had one trait in common. When they came to the limits of their knowledge of their world, in the margin of the map they'd write these words: "Beyond this there be dragons." They could have written, "Beyond this is the unknown," since they knew nothing about these regions, or they could have written, "Beyond this lies something beautiful and desirable." They assumed that beyond what they knew was a place of danger, not just possible death by natural causes, but a grisly death of being eaten by dragons. How are you looking at the unknown in your life? Are you fearful or excited about it? Are you petrified or motivated by your challenges? Remember, it's up to us to choose which way we respond. You can't just sit there. Larry Walters bought 45 weather balloons and strapped himself into a lawn chair. Some friends filled the balloons with helium and tied them to his chair. He took along a 6-pack of beer, a sandwich, and a BB gun, figuring he could shoot the balloons when he was ready to land. He assumed the balloons would lift him about 100 feet in the air. But when he soared to over 11,000 feet, he was too scared to shoot the balloons. He stayed airborne for more than 2 hours, forcing the nearby L.A. International Airport to shut down for much of the afternoon, causing delays in flights across the country. He made it safely back to the ground, and after the police were finished with him, some reporters asked him why he did it. He said, "Because you can't just sit there." Well, don't do something crazy, but I like that. Because you can't just sit there. Get involved. Do something. Don't just sit there. The Magic Ratio. In his study on marriage, Dr. John Gottman found what he called the magic ratio. He says there is an ideal ratio of positive interaction between husband and wife. Based on this ratio, they could predict which couples were more likely to divorce. What do you think the ratio would be? Maybe 1 positive interaction to 1 negative one? Gottman discovered that if there was less than 50% good to bad ratio, the couple was in big trouble. On the other hand, if a couple never had negative feelings or conflict, that meant they weren't being honest with each other. The magic formula is this: a marriage needs 5 times as many positive elements as negative ones. No marriage is 100% positive. It can't be. But it had better be more than 1 good to 1 bad. If it's not 5 good to 1 bad, we've got some work to do. A children's sermon. A minister was giving a children's sermon. He said, "Boys and girls, I'm thinking of something that has brown fur and a long bushy tail. It jumps from one tree limb to another. Can you tell me what it is?" The kids just sat there and stared at him like they had no idea at all. So he asked again, "Now think real hard. What has brown fur, a long bushy tail, and jumps from tree limb to tree limb?" Again, nothing but silence. So the minister asked one little boy, "Brian, don't you know what I'm thinking about?" Slowly, Brian said, "I know it must be Jesus, but it sure sounds like a squirrel to me." Sometimes it's hard to identify the presence of the Lord in the world, isn't it? Sometimes we're so prejudiced and have such strong stereotypes about who the Lord is, or maybe who His messengers are, that we run the risk of completely missing Him. I find people with an authentic faith to be healthy, vibrant, and alive. I hope you're one of those people. But you didn't. This poem speaks volumes. Remember the day I borrowed your new car and I dented it? I thought you'd kill me, but you didn't. Remember the time I dragged you to the beach and you said it would rain, and it did? I thought you'd say, I told you so, but you didn't. Remember when I flirted with all the guys to make you jealous, and you were? I thought you'd leave me, but you didn't. Remember when I forgot to tell you the dance was formal and you showed up in jeans? I thought you'd drop me, but you didn't. Yes, there were lots of things you didn't do, but you put up with me and you loved me and you protected me, and there were lots of things I wanted to make up to you when you returned from Vietnam, but you didn't. The poem is true. We don't live forever. I hope we don't take people for granted. If we share our gratitude for an important person while we have the opportunity to in our lives, it might make a big difference in two, ours and theirs. Special Olympics. In a Special Olympics race, the gun sounded, and no sooner had the athletes shot out of the starting blocks, but one of them tripped and fell hard on the track. The blood started coming out where he had scraped the skin off his body. But then a wonderful thing happened. The other sprinters stopped in their tracks and went back to the fallen athlete. They gathered around him and helped his wounds. Then they lifted him up. They put their arms around the shoulders of one another and walked together across the finish line, smiling and waving happily to the fans in the stands. With all the competition, greed, and ego normal people have, it makes you wonder who really is advantaged in life. Are they the ones who have Superman or Wonder Woman body and Einstein-like minds, or are they the ones who care about fallen comrades? No wonder they call it the Special Olympics. A squandered opportunity. In 1884, a couple called on the president of Harvard University, Charles Eliot. Their 15-year-old son had recently and very suddenly died. The grief-stricken mother said, "We would like to make a gift to Harvard as a memorial to our son. We want to help other young men get an education." The couple looked as though they had very meager financial resources. Eliot impatiently suggested they give a scholarship in their son's name. The couple said, "No, something more substantial than that, perhaps a building or two." Irritated, Eliot said, "Buildings are very expensive." The mother asked, "President Eliot, what has this entire university cost?" Eliot said it was worth several $1,000,000. She said to her husband, "Let's go, Leland. I have an idea." Her idea in 1884 was to contribute $26 million to open Leland Stanford University. Eliot's preconceived ideas cost Harvard dearly. We squander our opportunities when we don't listen to others. A teacher's surprise. Some kindergartners were bringing gifts to their teacher at the end of the year. The first child, whose father owned a florist shop, heard her teacher exclaim, "I'll bet there's some flowers in this box." The little girl proudly beamed as the teacher found some beautiful flowers. The teacher guessed correctly that the next gift was candy, because that little boy's father owned the town's candy store, and he was so proud too. The third present had some liquid which had seeped from its container onto the side of the box. Since this little boy's father owned the town's liquor store, the teacher wiped her finger along the liquid and tasted it. She said, "I'll bet it's champagne." He said, "No." She tasted again. "Is it wine?" He said, "No." She said, "Well, if it's not champagne and it's not wine, what could it be?" And the little boy replied, "It's a puppy." Life can surprise us. Some surprises are fun, while others are hard to take. Remember that God is working through all of them. No Catholics down there. Two Catholic nuns sat in the bleachers at a baseball game. It was hot, and the fans were especially unruly. Two men who were seated right behind the two nuns were the worst of the bleacher fans. They had had far too much to drink. Joe said loudly to his friend, "You know, Bob, we ought to move out to Arizona. I hear there aren't many Catholics out there." Bob said, "Oh, let's move to Montana. There are fewer Catholics there." Joe responded, "Bob, let's move to Alaska. I hear there are even fewer Catholics there." Well, one nun had had enough. She stood up, turned around, and said to the two drunks, "Why don't you guys go to hell? I understand there aren't any Catholics down there." We love it when the jerks are put in their places, and there seemed to be no shortage of jerks around, but remember, don't let them get to you. Develop a strategy to deal with them. Just try not to join their ranks. Josie Grice. One of my favorite stories about Jim Grice's mom. During the Depression, Josie Grice lived next to the railroad track. Perhaps once a day, someone who had been riding the rails would knock at the back door to see if she would give them something to eat. One very cold winter day, someone knocked. Josie opened the door to find a man who'd been riding the rails. He said, "I'm very hungry. Do you have anything I could eat?" She fixed him a good meal. He seemed to have a quality about him unique for most of the men who came to the door. After finishing, he asked, "Do you have a lot of people who come to your back door?" She said, "Perhaps one a day." He said, "Did you know that your house is marked? I'd like to take that mark off your house." Josie said, "No, I don't think that's necessary. Maybe God put that mark on this house." Maybe some of the interruptions in our lives are really divine appointments, allowing us to help other people in need. Walking their dog. Two men were walking their dogs. One had a German Shepherd and the other had a tiny Chihuahua. The first man said, "Let's go eat." The other said, "But what would we do with our dogs?" "Don't worry, just follow my lead." As they walked into a restaurant, the waiter told the first man, "I'm sorry, but dogs are not allowed." "Well, this German Shepherd is my seeing eye dog." So the waiter seated him. The waiter turned to the other man and said, "I'm sorry, sir, I can't seat you with your dog." "This is a seeing eye dog," the second man said slyly. The waiter said, "That Chihuahua is a seeing eye dog?" The man said, "You mean they gave me a Chihuahua?" Some people exploit any situation, exaggerating their need to gain an advantage. We compromise when we say everyone else is doing it or nobody will notice. Let's not bend the rules if it costs us our integrity, even if nobody is looking. The Kiss. A general and his lieutenant were traveling on a passenger train. They conversed freely with an attractive young lady and her grandmother, who were seated in their compartment. As the train entered a long and dark tunnel, two distinct sounds were heard: a kiss, followed by a loud slap. The young lady thought how glad she is that he kissed her, but she's disappointed her grandmother slapped him. Grandmother is shocked that the young lieutenant would kiss her granddaughter, but she's proud her granddaughter slapped him. The general is proud his young lieutenant kissed the young lady, but he's shocked that she slapped him instead of the lieutenant. And the lieutenant found the perfect opportunity to kiss an attractive young girl and slap his superior officer at the same time. Like them, sometimes our perspectives in life are distorted too. Facts are friendly. Let's respond appropriately. Irma Bombeck. Irma Bombeck wrote about sitting in an airport, trying to enjoy the peace and quiet before her flight, but an elderly lady sat next to her and said, "I'll bet it's cold in Chicago." Stone-faced, Irma said, "It's likely." But the woman continued, "I haven't been there for nearly 3 years." Irma grunted, "Uh-huh." Then the woman said, "My husband's body is on this plane. We've been married for 53 years. Irma wrote, "I don't think I've ever detested myself more than I did at that moment. A desperate human being had turned to a stranger. She needed no advice, money, assistance, or expertise, just someone to listen. She talked steadily until we boarded the plane. As I put my things in the overhead compartment, I heard her say to her seat companion, 'I'll bet it's cold in Chicago.' I prayed, 'Please, God, let the lady sitting next to her listen. Please, God, help us also to listen to others in need.'" It works every time. 5-year-old Ryan locked himself in the bathroom and absolutely refused to come out. His distraught mother called the fire department. When the fire chief arrived at Ryan's house, he went to the bathroom and said, "Okay, little girl, we'll come and get you." Immediately, the door opened from the inside and out bolted the 5-year-old little boy. Loudly and vehemently, Ryan protested, "I am not a little girl, I'm a big boy." The fire chief then told Ryan's mother, "It works every time." Reverse psychology can be most effective in parenting, as well as in business and work situations, and in virtually every human relationship. Sometimes when people use it on us, we react like an immature 5-year-old rather than like a real adult. People can manipulate us when we let our emotions dictate our responses. Like the fire chief said, it works every time. My most prized possession. As a man drove down a highway, he saw a suitcase fly off the top of a car. He stopped and picked it up, but he couldn't find the other driver. The only clue to the driver's identity was a $20 gold piece inscribed, "Given to Otis Sampson at his retirement by Portland Cement Company." After much correspondence, Mr. Sampson was contacted. He wrote back and said to discard the suitcase and send only the gold piece. Mr. Sampson used the phrase, "my most precious possession," to describe the gold piece. So the man wrote a letter telling Otis Sampson about his most prized possession, Jesus Christ. Later, the man received a package. It was the $20 gold piece. Mr. Sampson wrote, "We want you to have this gold piece. You were the first to tell us about Jesus. Now he is our most prized possession." Don't be afraid to share your most prized possession with others. I'm Tom Harrison, and these are Perceptions from Asbury United Methodist Church. Perceptions is a registered trademark of Durham Incorporated. All rights are reserved. Special thanks to Dave Hopkins for his skill in taping and editing the scripts, to Victoria Smith for making all the arrangements, to Darrell Durham, whose genius and vision has created and sustained the ministry of Perceptions, and to Asbury United Methodist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, for its heart for Christ and for their desire to be in mission to our world.